Let's get right to our breaking news this morning. Longtime Trump org CFO Allen Weisselberg was just sentenced to 5 months in jail for lying under oath in Donald Trump's civil fraud trial. This sentencing comes, of course, just days before the start of Trump's hush money trial. And as part of his plea deal, Weisselberg is not expected to testify. MSNBC's Lisa Rubin, who was inside the courthouse for the sentencing, is joining us now. And also with us, criminal defense attorney Danny Cevallos and former federal prosecutor Glenn Kirschner. Both are MSNBC legal analysts. So, Lisa, Weisselberg already served about 100 days for dodging taxes. Now he's headed back to Rikers. Fill us in.
So, Anna, when Allen Weisselberg arrived at court this morning, you could tell how the rest of the morning was going to go. And that's because he showed up in what can only be described as athleisure. As Glenn and Danny know well, when a defendant shows up at his sentencing in something other than a suit for court, that's because he's expecting to be immediately remanded, or, in other words, taken into custody. And that's indeed what happened with Allen Weisselberg. The whole proceeding lasted a matter of minutes. And as soon as Allen Weisselberg told the judge he had nothing to say, the DA said that they weren't going to deviate from the promised 5 months in the plea agreement. Allen Weisselberg was immediately handcuffed by 2 members of the court officers here and taken through a back entrance where presumably he was placed in a car and taken into custody.
So, Danny, Weisselberg was employed, we know, for 50 years by the Trump organization. He got a $2 million severance deal when those initial tax charges arrived, and now the Trump company is still paying his legal fees. So were prosecutors hoping to get Weisselberg to flip on Trump with these new charges about him lying?
Well, really, this seemed to be more punishment for Weisselberg likely not doing what prosecutors and what the state wanted him to do when he did testify. And in a sense, they gave him a kind of a deal in that they really only charged him with the crimes that predated his first conviction so that he wouldn't be technically in violation of probation. So there clearly was some element of a deal here. But at the same time, prosecutors have made it clear to Weisselberg that when he testifies, he better testify the way they want him to, which is, by the way, a hammer that prosecutors frequently use. Perjury is something that probably happens all the time in court. It does happen all the time in court. So for that reason, it's really a discretionary tool used by prosecutors most often if a witness that they want to testify in a particular way goes south. That's where you see it come up quite a bit. But you're absolutely right in the observation that he came in the athletic year. Not all jurisdictions send someone to prison right away. So Glenn will tell you, in federal court, you often get a turn-in date so you can get your affairs in order. It actually helps you with your sentence. But in this situation, if someone shows up in sweats, pretty good indicator they're going in right away. I
assume this sends a message, at the very least, to witnesses who may be testifying in the hush money case. Glenn, Michael Cohen alleges Weisselberg played a key role in the hush money payments to Stormy Daniels. Again, Weisselberg hasn't been charged in this case. He is not expected to testify in the upcoming trial. But how much will his guilty plea loom over the hush money trial next week?
Yeah, this was actually, I think, a strategic move by the Manhattan District Attorney's Office to neutralize Allen Weisselberg. Remember, Anna, there was a time when we heard on an endless loop that covert audio recording that Michael Cohen made discussing the hush money payment scheme with Donald Trump. And what did Michael Cohen say? Oh, I've talked to Allen Weisselberg about how to set this whole thing up. The minute the jurors in Donald Trump's 2016 election interference case, the hush money falsifying business records case, the minute the jurors hear that audio recording, they will all be thinking to themselves, oh, where's Allen Weisselberg? Let's see if he corroborates or contradicts what Michael Cohen said on that audio recording. Well, the prosecutors have neutralized Allen Weisselberg because he's not going to testify for the prosecution because he is now, a convicted perjurer. If the defense tries to put him on the stand, if Donald Trump tries to call him as a witness, how credible will his testimony be now that he is not only convicted as part of a 15-year-long criminal scheme to defraud in the first degree, that was the Trump Organization prosecution, but now he is a twice convicted felon, having lied, in essence, to at least in part, help Donald Trump. He's damaged goods. He has now been neutralized. There will be a lot of talk about him but I think it unlikely we will see him as a witness.
Some could argue Michael Cohen is also damaged goods and is a convicted liar. We'll talk more about that in just a second. But first, Danny, before we move on, weigh in on Weisselberg's importance in the hush money trial.
Well, exactly. Glenn laid it out perfectly. I mean, he is a piece of the puzzle, and he might be a piece of the puzzle that the Trump team thinks is helpful to their cause. But I mean, I couldn't have said it better than Glenn. He's effectively been neutralized. He would be, if Trump wanted to use him as a witness, he now has credibility problems. And by the way, Michael Cohen, I know we're going to talk about this, may have some credibility problems, but they won't be that damaging given the facts of this particular case. And we can talk about that as well. But in this case, it's going to be documents plus Michael Cohen, and that's what might neutralize any credibility issues that Cohen has.
Glenn, Michael Avenatti, who is currently in prison for stealing book proceeds from his former client, Stormy Daniels, spoke to MSNBC's Ari Melber last night, and I just want to play a part of what he said about Michael Cohen. Take a listen.
Every case needs to have one or two primary witnesses who tell the story. From my perspective, I surmise that the DA is going to use potentially Michael Cohen or Stormy Daniels for that purpose. And I think that has the potential to be a disaster. Michael Cohen is and you know, I've never been a fan of Michael for various reasons. You know, he's a serial liar. He's shown himself to be incapable of telling the truth.
Okay, Avenatti is behind bars. He obviously has some credibility issues. But, Glenn, is this a case of takes one to know one?
Yeah, you know, anytime I prosecuted a conspiracy, a criminal agreement involving multiple people, everybody in that conspiracy was a criminal. Many of them were liars. So what I had to try to do was bring the lower level conspirators on board, flip them, clean them up, so to speak, meaning I would look for every shred of evidence that corroborated what they were now telling us, the investigators and the prosecutors, about what they did and about what their co-conspirators did. And in one sense, yes, Michael Cohen can be viewed as damaged goods, but in another sense, he's going to be corroborated. And why is he damaged? He is damaged in large part because he was telling lies to help Donald Trump stay out of hot water. That is actually the kind of weakness on the credibility front that prosecutors can turn into a strength. He was lying for Donald Trump. He has now come clean and is testifying against Donald Trump, and he is corroborated in a number of ways.
Danny, you were shaking your head when we were listening to that Avenatti sound.
Absolutely, yeah. Corroboration is key. So this is a great example. So Michael Cohen maybe is somebody who has credibility issues, but there are going to be documents in this case. And together with Michael Cohen, with his lack of credibility, whatever it may be, his story may match up to the documents in a way that the defense's theory won't work. And by the way, prosecutors, especially prosecutors like Glenn, know that when they use cooperating witnesses, they may have credibility issues, and they plan for that. And in fact, I am such a Glenn Kirschner fan that I can recite his particular block that he uses in closing, and it goes a little like this, Glenn. Tell me if I get it. It's like the government didn't choose this witness. The defendant chose this witness. Trump chose Michael Cohen to commit crimes with, to confide in, to break the law. So we, the government, didn't choose this guy. The defendant chose this guy. And they don't even really need to get into that so much because Michael Cohen is really going to be corroborating what documents say. And all of us have seen these documents. We've seen the checks. We've seen the David Dennison and Peggy Peterson contract. We've seen all these things for years. So Michael Cohen's credibility, they'll hit it, but it may not be that effective. And Glenn, how'd I do?
Danny, you probably made me sound better than I ever sounded in my closing argument, so I cannot add to the perfection that was Danny's recitation.
Well, we'll end it on perfection then. Guys, obviously a conversation to be continued as we gear up for this trial to start next week. Lisa Rubin, Danny Cevallos, and Glenn Kirschner, thank you all.